The unrest today isn't coincidental. The US is gearing up for war. Let's talk about the US's endgame and the military-industrial complex. A few years ago, the US's diplomatic support for Ukraine to join NATO, basically simplifying things a bit, threatened Russia in the same way that the Cuban Missile Crisis did to the US, prompting Russia to invade Ukraine. The Russia-Ukrainian war then in turn allowed the US to sell off their old weapons which they could no longer use to Ukraine under the guise of aid for profit, and also justify the development of new weapons domestically, which they then sold to the EU, which was concerned about the Russia-Ukrainian war themselves and their own security concerns, while also helping the US modernize their own military and selling off these new weapons to other wars that were going on across the world, earning them profit. But the story doesn't end there though, because with the loss of reliable energy sources like gas and oil, the US looked to centralize their energy needs away from Russia and Ukraine, and instead focused on deposing Maduro in Venezuela to secure some of the most important and largest oil reserves in the world that are untapped. The US openly admits to this being one of the factors for them securing Venezuela as a strategic asset. They also continue to fund Israel because it's one of their most stalwart security strongholds in West Asia, which allows them to deter the rise of Iran as a new nuclear power, and in turn retain control over the most important trade routes in the world like Suez Canal. Remember that ship that blocked the Suez Canal for a few weeks and the entire world economy tanked? The US wants control over that. The trade routes don't end there though, because with the melting Arctic ice, new trade routes that are becoming increasingly important and strategic are opening up in the global north. And the US doesn't want Canada and Russia to solely dominate these spaces, so they're looking for a stronghold in the Arctic. What's that stronghold? Maybe Greenland, which you've probably heard of in recent news that the US wants to control. Where else is the US moving? Their dispatch of military forces to Taiwan shows a race to crack the nut that is Taiwan's microchip manufacturing, and they want to retain technological control or technological hegemony by making sure that it doesn't fall into China's hands solely, besides their domestic and political strategic interests. All of this points to a move to centralize the US's most necessary trade resources, because trade falters before war starts. And in a world that is becoming multipolar rather than the US just ruling it with the rise of Russia and China, the US knows that there will be conflict to follow, so they're making sure they can be self-sustaining. Not just that, but the military-industrial complex is pushing the US toward funding more proxy wars abroad during this volatile time to earn more money from the arms trade and to expand their imperialist agenda through claiming other nations' natural resources through settlements or control, such as the deposement of Maduro again in Venezuela. All of this is made possible by the hundreds of millions of dollars or more that these very big mega corporations in defense like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, or Boeing spend on lobbying or influencing US Congress decision makers that influence the US national defense budget, which in turn influences which wars the US gets into, and therefore which wars these companies earn money from by selling weapons to. That's not to say that these companies are pulling all the strings behind the scenes, but it's an undeniable fact that the US is preparing for a world order that is going to be full of unrest and conflict. So be aware, these individual events are not coincidences nor are they isolated events.